Tenakoto Katoa. Welcome back to the Youth Factor, where we aim to see the world through the lens of the future. I'm your host, Alex Jung, and I hope to take you on a virtual journey around the world, where stories untold will be shared, current issues will be discussed, and the voices of the youth will be heard. Today, we explore a very different scene in the largest country in Asia. Nicknamed the Red Dragon, this country is renowned for its rich history, culture, and food. From mystical beliefs of Taoism and Confucianism to absolutely stunning festivals such as the Lunar New Year and the Mid Autumn Festival, amazing landscapes, and the home of dumplings, Peking duck, fried rice, noodles, just speaking of it makes me hungry. With a language as old as 6,000 years and 56 ethnic groups, this country's culture and history is one to admire. Today we explore mainland China. And joining me today is our guest host, Toby Wang. Toby is from Jiangxi province, but is currently studying at the United World College's Li Po Chun in Hong Kong. Welcome, Toby.
Hey Alex.
Could you please introduce yourself, just your name, age, hobbies, a little bit about your hometown?
Oh yeah, sure. My name is Toby. 17 years old this year. I like to game quite a bit and explore remote part of the city, which is Hong Kong right now. The province of my hometown is famous for its pottery, but then the specific region I am from, called Dayu, is famous for its tungsten mines. However, they are running out right now, so the economy in the local towns are not very optimistic. Um, while international cities in China have brilliant infrastructure, but comparing my hometown to Hong Kong, there's a stark contrast between their levels of development.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to have you on the podcast, Toby. Before we begin discussing some political issues, what do you love about China in terms of its culture, language, history, and food?
Um, oh, this would have to go back a few years. China has such rich culture like no other country. My favorite tourist site is in the far west, in a place called Dunhuang with ancient Buddhist grottos and murals. It's said to be the first place where Buddhism first entered China and the first Indian monks stepped foot on Chinese soil. The Mogao caves record so much of the Chinese legends, stories about the gods and the mythical beasts.
Mm.
There's too much to be spoken about. The Chinese language, Mandarin, it's really a unique one. It has so many expressions that cannot be translated with the same level of poetry and romance. And perhaps it has something to do with it being my mother tongue. I think it's a lot more effective in conveying emotions than English.
Mm.
Okay, let's move on, Alex. There's too much to be said.
So let's get started. Today's main topic is China's BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping. President Xi has described the BRI as a vision that goes beyond geographical boundaries and seeks to create a common future for mankind. Of course, this initiative in its nature is extremely controversial. The BRI is consisted of two main components: the belt part, which is overland transportation routes connecting China with Central Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and Russia. And then you have the road, which is the sea routes connecting China, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and a bit of Greece and Venice. So, could you begin by giving a little bit of an overview of what exactly the BRI is and how it works?
Well, you pretty much have it right there. The initiative aims to connect the prosperous economies in East Asia and Europe by constructing numerous roads, bridges, and railways to promote even stronger economic prosperity. The initiative sees the Middle East as a region of high economic potential and seeks to increase economic ties with it by increasing trade, which can obviously be achieved by using the Belt and Road Initiative to build infrastructure, which has already been done as the Chinese-Pakistan Economic Corridor, connecting the Xinjiang Autonomous Region and the Gwadar port, I believe, in the western Pakistan. Aside from politics, the Belt and Road Initiative seeks to build political trust between contributing nations, as the initiative, I guess, requires political stability, especially regional stability and peace to operate. Though there are concerns about the initiative being used as a political and economic weapon to seize points of interest.
So, obviously, this network initiative is benefiting China in some way or form. How exactly is it benefiting China?
Well, the BRI opens China to a lot of new markets in Europe and the Middle East, which provides China with the opportunity to increase sales of its middle and low end products, which is very good at making. China can also import technology from nations along the belts and roads of the initiative to speed up its own research and development. Infrastructure and loans made to invest in the initiative strengthens the national currency of China because um, foreign countries tend to make loans in the Chinese currency, the RMB, which then can lead the currency to appreciate against other more dominant currencies such as the US dollar. This can in turn benefit China's international relations with countries influenced by the initiative as it demands close collaboration and communication with all contributing nations.
Mm. Yeah, so certainly there are lots of benefits for China, but one of the reasons why this is such a controversial initiative is China's overarching geopolitical influence as a result. So, do you see in any way this being potentially dangerous in international politics? Because we have kind of um, tension between US and China at the moment. So, could you see this being potentially dangerous?
Well, funnily enough, an US official has recently visited China to namely ease tensions between the USA and China. The main purpose of the meeting was to discuss how to improve relationships between the two countries and ease current conflicts. The less aggressive attitude compared to the normal tones of speech the US is expressing perhaps suggests that disagreements between the two nations will proceed in forms of collaboration rather than direct conflict. The US has also had little response to BRI, although it says it has introduced the B3W, which is Build Back Better World with the G7. Aside from that, has responded very little to China's BRI, which has honestly began quite a few years ago.
Hmm. So, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, which is one of the countries involved in the initiative, said the Belt and Road Initiative is a one-way street that primarily benefits China while leaving participating countries with few benefits and many risks. To what extent do you agree with this claim?
It's definitely true that China benefits greatly from BRI in all imaginable aspects. However, investment into the initiative is not directly done. It's not all done by foreign nations alone. China's state-owned enterprises have invested directly into the initiative, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where countries lack the funds to build infrastructure. Although it is quite evident that the BRI is to serve the national interests of China. So by signing the contracts with nations and making loans in the RMB, this can formulate a debt trap for small nations that they will struggle to repay the debts, allowing China to use the built infrastructure in future negotiations.
Hmm. So we'll talk about the debts a bit later as well, but I wanted to talk a little
Yeah.
bit about COVID-19 because COVID-19 hit China very hard. It's the country of origin for the virus. So how has the BRI been affected, like this whole initiative and the progress of it as a result of COVID-19? Also, maybe aside from the BRI, just in general, how has China, namely its economy, been affected by COVID-19?
Of course. The COVID-19 pandemic has essentially hit the pause button for the construction of the infrastructure used in the initiative in a lot of nations. A study done by the People's University of China has discovered that countries with poorer economies have a higher tendency of not paying debts. This is in direct correlation with the number of cases of COVID-19 the country has. A nation used in the research was Lebanon, which um, the ratio determined between the number of COVID cases and the tendency to not pay loans is 1 to 75. So essentially, COVID-19 has caused numerous industries in China to shrink and collapse, including hospitality. You could say that local restaurants, this is also speaking from personal experience, local restaurants have also shut down, been replaced by international brands. The lockdowns that have occurred have had a great impact as people could not exit their homes for quite a while. This also put significant strain on the economy as people could not work. Factories producing masks benefited from the pandemic for a short while in the beginning, but then they were later taken over by the government as some of them were exploiting the situation and charging unreasonable prices.
So do you think you can see those effects right now, even though it's been now we're kind of in the post-COVID era. Do you still see the effects of COVID-19 today?
Well, yes, of course, especially in the new form of education and working, such as when you do things online. Online learning has been a great thing since, I mean, we've experienced it firsthand. Half of our classes were basically done through Zoom, Team, Google Classroom, whatsoever, during the period of the pandemic. So this has been a prominent mode of work for a lot of new industries in China.
Mhm.
For example, I've been back to mainland China in the past 2 weeks, and there were these offices that could not be rented because they simply did not need as much space for people to work as they could easily hire people and get them to work online and remotely. So they do not even need the money to hire or sorry to rent an office for these people.
Mm. So definitely we can see the effects of COVID today, and I think that's a very global thing. But of course, China had was quite heavily impacted. One of the last countries in the world to actually ease COVID measures as well. So it's quite
Oh
a
yes,
period.
yeah.
So we're going to come back to the idea of debt, right? So several developing nations are involved in the BRI. So we've got the Middle East, Southeast Asia. So how do you think it is benefiting them? Because there's a reason why they joined the BRI, right? But also,
Mhm.
how has debt sustainability been affected? Could you perhaps start off by kind of defining the term, what debt sustainability is?
Well, that sustainability is defined as the ability of a nation to pay its financial burdens without excessive external economic support or going into default. Going to default is the ability to the inability to repay a debt from a country. China's infrastructure can bring the local nations economic opportunities, as China has done a lot of times before. They have put a lot of money into supporting the Middle East region, such as Afghanistan and Pakistan, although specific examples I'm not very aware of. Um, but the built infrastructure from the BRI is quite criticized to center around the interests of China and not designed to benefit the nations they are built. So then the railroads, bridges, everything, you can argue that these are not primarily um, built to benefit the local economy as the debts and the people employed to operate and maintain the whole thing are primarily Chinese, which is largely criticized by Western media. But then in the Chinese media, they still argue that investment is back and forth, meaning that China invests in these developing countries, which then they can produce their products and exchange technology with. So then that brings even more investment opportunities from China. However, that couldn't perhaps that's not entirely true.
Right. So you're from Hong Kong. So you are currently living in Hong Kong. How long have you been living in Hong Kong for?
Uh, I came here in 2019, so you could argue that's around 4 years.
4 years. So Hong
Yeah.
Kong's status as a special administrative region is one that is very contentious. So what do you think Hong Kong's role is in this BRI system, and how is China utilizing Hong Kong's position?
China has been using Hong Kong's role as the Eastern Pearl, or as the widely accepted international port to interact with the Southeastern Asian countries participating in the BRI. Hong Kong has sent many of its professionals into numerous industries, including these designers and scientists in the construction of railways, airports, and handling pollution to foreign countries to share the city's experience handling a large and complex railway network. Hong Kong's significance in Asia has really allowed it to seize multiple contracts with foreign nations in Asia, as it has great experience interacting, especially with the Southeast Asian markets and foreign investors.
Mm. So now onto the topic of environment, right? Because
Mhm.
obviously this project is not very friendly to the environment, and it has been criticized several times. because it's damaging several environments, not just in its own country, but in the countries they do the projects in. So, the VOA news said that BRI's carbon emissions are set to raise the world temperature by 2 degrees, which is a lot from just one initiative to raise the world's temperature. I mean, 1 degree difference, we can see the effects of that right now. I mean, just based upon the last couple of years, the number of natural disasters that we see, the heat strokes that we're seeing, it's very evident. So, what are your
Mhm.
perspectives on China's climate control efforts? Are they really putting in effort?
Well, as I was looking into the issue, the some of the Chinese media is arguing that they are in fact promoting the movement towards a green and sustainable future because the railroads that they are building are essentially running on electricity, and China supposedly has sent many of its produced wind turbines and hydroelectric appliances to countries such as Thailand, which they have implemented near the railroads they're building to provide electricity, which they argue to be, uh, which China argues its production to be contributing to sustainable energy to be above 70%,
Mm,
which is quite argumentative since this collaboration with the US has strong tensions. So then uh, it's very likely that the Chinese is faking data in some ways, but that's a sensitive topic left to another time. Another way that China is protecting kind of a biodiversity is its soundproof barriers and fences implemented in China to protect animals from entering the rails in which the trains go by, and to use soundproof barriers to decrease its influence to the nearby environment.
mm,
Um, but then essentially, even in the Chinese media, there are research papers done which admit that the project has very large environmental impacts, including its challenges in building railroads and airports in places such as Russia, where the climate is very cold and um, essentially the climate does not interact well with the material they're using to build the railroads.
mm. So I'll move on to my final question. And I think this is one that actually a lot of countries can discuss this question as well. But a lot of my sources does come from Western news outlets, right? Do you think China is inaccurately represented in Western media? And do you think there are some stereotypes that should be clarified and resolved around China in any regard?
Um, Inaccurately represented, perhaps not, perhaps yes. For example, in the case where it comes to the Xinjiang re-education camps that has been discussed quite a lot recently, the Western media claims it to be a form of human rights abuse where people have been detained, imprisoned arbitrarily, which
Yes.
goes against the Sustainable Development Goals or the Human Rights Declaration. But then I've personally spoken to somebody who's working in the educational bureau
Wow.
and speaking with people with a lot of connections in the Chinese government. Well, they claim that it's simply a different perception in these re-education camps because essentially what the Chinese government say to its local people is that it's spending money to provide training and jobs to the people of Xinjiang and the ethnic group. So it's actually benefiting them, and the national enterprises of China are losing money as they're basically doing charity and donating money to build this infrastructure. But um, the Western media can see it as a like a detention camp because people are not allowed to leave and they're being kept there in very large groups, which is very like the Jewish concentration camps during the Second World War. Um, Essentially that. Then there's also the kind of um, Yes, another example is the June 4th protests, where the the person in the educational bureau I spoke to also claims to be inaccurate information, as he says that the Chinese army does not touch students whatsoever because of political reasons or just for their personal safety, as attacking students was against the law and would result in them in, well, essentially being canceled and fired from their posts.
Yeah.
But then he's trying to justify it by saying that there are these people who are hired by external parties of interest, such as the US or the UK, presumably. This is also like a conspiracy theory for the Hong Kong protests in 2019, where they're hired by people, which is later proven to be true, as some of the students protesting have admitted to receiving bribes.
Wow.
But then it's it's highly inaccurate information for both sides, as they take like a great interest in these issues. So as commoners like us who don't have the original sources to this information, we cannot really say, because the media has a lot of power and they do have a lot of content that they can fake for you to believe. So then, stereotypes or not, um, I don't think there is exactly a stereotype, but it's simply like how you decide to portray how China does things,
Right.
because yeah, it's really just two sides of the same stories that we need to try to see.
So it's very differing narratives around one topic. And I didn't know that's the way the Xinjiang detention camps were viewed in this kind of different narrative as well. That's something I hadn't considered. But yeah, so thank you so much for sharing today. Are there any last words you'd like to say about the topics we discussed, or is there any ways that we as the youth can make an impact or difference? Maybe this is a bit far-fetched because it's such a complex kind of initiative and system, but is there any impact or change we can make?
I mean, if we're going to make an impact, it's got to be as a group, because I don't believe in individualism, because I'm a communist from China. Um, well, I mean, with the education we are receiving today, especially at UWC, we can see a lot of problems that are existing in the world, which world leaders are refusing to tackle for whatever reason. Um, well, I guess seeing the problem to the world is the first step to solving it, right? And this is not limited to just the issue we're discussing today, such as the political tension between countries. It goes down to a lot of industries, such as I guess sustainability and uh, I don't know, prejudice against groups of people. The change will come naturally, I believe, in the near future. We just gotta be who we are and use the knowledge we learned today to benefit the place we live in.
So education, essentially, educating and making people more aware, raising awareness on issues around the
Yeah,
world.
this sounds very stereotypical, but I guess it's how it's supposed to be done.
Well, thank you once again, Toby, for joining in this episode and representing
Thank you,
China.
Alex.
And this wraps up this episode of the Youth Factor. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you look forward to the next step of our journey, which is in Bangladesh. Thank you.